China's First Empire, How 500 Years of Brutal War Forged a Nation. A hook and intro. The year is 221 before Christ. For 5 centuries, China has been a land of blood and chaos. 7 great states, each led by ruthless kings and brilliant generals, have torn the land apart in a ceaseless struggle for dominance. Millions have died, cities have burned. Empires have risen and fallen, all under the nominal gaze of a forgotten dynasty. Peace was a distant dream, unity an impossible fantasy. But then one man emerged from the western frontiers. A king consumed by ambition, a general forged in fire. His name was Ying Zheng, and he would not stop until every rival kingdom lay broken at his feet. In a whirlwind of conquest, he crushed the last 6 remaining states one by one. And when the dust settled, he declared himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. The great unity had arrived, bought with iron and blood. This was not just another dynasty. This was the birth of an empire that would define a civilization for 2,000 years. What forces drove China into 5 centuries of unending war? What kind of men and what kind of ideas could thrive in such a brutal crucible? And how did one ruthless king, through sheer will and terrifying efficiency, finally forge a scattered land into the most powerful empire the ancient world had ever seen? Today, we delve into the epic, often brutal saga of ancient China. From the proud yet flawed beginnings of the Zhou dynasty, through the fragmentation of the spring and autumn and warring states periods, to the stunning, violent climax of the Qin unification. This is a story of ambition, philosophy, technological leaps, and unimaginable human cost. It is the story of how China became China, a story that continues to shape our world today. Get ready for a journey through the forge of a civilization. Historical context and setup. To understand the chaos, we must first glimpse the order that preceded it. Our story begins around 1046 before Christ with the rise of the Zhou dynasty. They were not the first rulers of China. Before them stood the Shang dynasty, a powerful realm known for its advanced bronze metallurgy, its sophisticated oracle bone script, and a ruling class that communicated with ancestors through elaborate rituals. But the Shang grew decadent, its last king a notorious tyrant. The Zhou, a rising power from the west, saw their opportunity. Led by the visionary King Wen and his mighty son, King Wu, they marched against the Shang. They didn't just conquer, they claimed a divine mandate. This was the mandate of heaven, or Tiananmen. It proclaimed that heaven granted the right to rule to a just and virtuous sovereign, but could withdraw it from a corrupt or tyrannical one. This wasn't just propaganda. It was a profound political philosophy that would justify dynastic change for millennia, establishing a powerful precedent that rulers were accountable to a higher moral order. With the mandate of heaven, the Zhou established a vast kingdom, far larger than the Shang. But how do you govern such an immense territory without modern communication or infrastructure? The Zhou's solution was ingenious but ultimately flawed. The Fengjian system, often translated as feudalism. The king granted large territories and authority to his relatives, trusted allies, and meritorious officials. These feudal lords, or zhuhu, would govern their domains, collect taxes, and raise armies, all while swearing loyalty and offering tribute to the Zhou king. This system was deeply rooted in kinship ties and ritual propriety known as li. It was a hierarchical pyramid, with the Zhou king at its apex, followed by feudal lords, high officials, and then a rising class of scholar administrators known as shi. For over 2.5 centuries, this Western Zhou period saw relative stability. The capital, Heiyajing near modern Xi'an, was a center of power and culture. However, the seeds of future conflict were already sown. The Fengjian system, by its very nature, decentralized power. Over generations, these feudal lords became increasingly independent. Their loyalty to the distant Zhou king waned. Blood ties stretched thin. and in 771 before Christ, the inevitable happened. An alliance of rebellious vassals and nomadic tribes, the Quanrong, attacked Heiyajing. The capital fell and the Zhou king, King Yu, was killed. The royal family was forced to flee eastward, relocating their capital to Loi, modern-day Luoyang. This marked the end of the Western Zhou and the dawn of the Eastern Zhou period. The mandate of heaven had not been lost, but it was severely shaken. The Zhou king was now a mere figurehead, his authority largely nominal. China was about to descend into 5 centuries of relentless war. A historical context and setup continued. The Eastern Zhou period, beginning in 770 before Christ, is divided into 2 brutal eras, the Spring and Autumn period and the even more intense Warring States period. This wasn't a sudden descent into madness, but a slow, grinding erosion of central authority, driven by the very system the Zhou had created. Imagine the world of the Spring and Autumn period, from 771 to 476 before Christ. The Zhou king still sat on his throne in Luoyang, but his power was like an empty shell. He could still grant titles and bestow blessings, but no one truly obeyed him. Instead, hundreds of smaller states, once loyal vassals, now vied for supremacy. From this chaos, a new political order, or rather a temporary balance, emerged, the system of hegemons, or Ba. These were powerful lords from states like Qi, Jin, Chu, and Qin, who in theory protected the Zhou king and maintained order. In reality, they were ambitious warlords, leading coalitions of weaker states fighting each other for regional dominance. They would convene grand conferences, form alliances, and engage in limited, often ritualized warfare, all under the rallying cry of revere the king and repel the barbarians. Zun Wang Grangye. Duke Huan of Qi in the 7th century before Christ was one of the first and most famous hegemons. With his brilliant advisor Guanzhong, he reformed his state, strengthened its economy, and forged a powerful army, becoming the undisputed leader of the northern states. But even his authority was temporary, a delicate balance of power, not true unity. This period also saw a profound shift in technology. Iron began to replace bronze, first in tools, then in weapons. This was a game changer. Iron plows led to better agriculture, supporting larger populations. Iron weapons meant bigger, deadlier armies. Warfare was still somewhat constrained by rituals, but the foundations for mass destruction were being laid. And as the old order crumbled, so did old certainties. People questioned everything. Why was there so much suffering? What was the right way to govern? This intellectual ferment gave birth to the 100 schools of thought, a golden age of Chinese philosophy. Confucius, or Confuzi, wandered from state to state, seeking a ruler who would implement his vision of benevolent governance, based on ritual, filial piety, and ethical conduct. He emphasized the importance of Ren, humaneness, and Li, propriety, believing that a virtuous ruler could inspire moral behavior in his people. His teachings, compiled in the Analects, would later become the bedrock of Chinese imperial thought, but during his lifetime, they found few willing ears among the ambitious warlords. Laozi and Zhuangzi, the founders of Taoism, offered a different path, advocating for harmony with the Tao, the natural way of the universe. They emphasized spontaneity, simplicity, and wu-wei, non-action, a philosophy of effortless action and flowing with nature. Moism, founded by Mozi, preached universal love and utilitarianism, condemning aggressive warfare. These philosophies were not just abstract ideas, they were competing blueprints for a broken society, and they were all searching for a solution to the ever-present chaos. But the chaos was about to get much, much worse. The traditional date for the beginning of the Warring States period is 403 before Christ, when the powerful state of Jin formally split into 3 new, equally ambitious states, Han, Zhao, and Wei. This event signaled the complete collapse of any remaining pretense of Zhou authority or the hegemon system. The gloves were off. The story unfolds. From 476 to 221 before Christ, China entered its most brutal and transformative phase, the Warring States period. This was total war. No longer were conflicts limited or ritualized. States fought for absolute survival and complete conquest. The goal was simple: eliminate all rivals and unify China under one absolute ruler. The number of states dwindled rapidly, absorbed by their more powerful neighbors. Eventually, only 7 remained, each a powerhouse: Qin, Chu, Qi, Yan, Han, Zhou, and Wei. These were not small feudal domains, they were large, complex territorial states with sophisticated administrative systems, vast agricultural bases, and professional armies. Warfare itself was revolutionized. Chariots, once the centerpiece of aristocratic combat, were still used but were increasingly supplemented and then overshadowed by massive infantry armies. Soldiers were conscripted from the peasantry, forming forces numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Iron weaponry became standard, and devastating new technologies emerged, like the crossbow, capable of piercing armor from a distance. Siege warfare became highly sophisticated, with engineers devising elaborate machines to breach colossal city walls. The human cost was immense. Entire populations were mobilized for war, building fortifications, digging canals, or fighting on the front lines. Battles claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. The Battle of Changping in 260 before Christ between Qin and Zhou is a chilling example. After a 3-year stalemate, Qin delivered a decisive victory, capturing over 400,000 Zhao soldiers. Instead of taking them prisoner, the Qin general, Bai Qi, ordered them all buried alive. It was a horrifying act, but it broke the back of Qin's most formidable rival. In this cutthroat environment, philosophical ideas took a dark, pragmatic turn. While Confucianism emphasized virtue and Taoism preached harmony, a new school of thought, legalism, gained ascendancy. Legalists believed that human nature was inherently selfish and that only strict laws, harsh punishments, and absolute state control could bring order. The state of Qin, located in the rugged western frontiers, became the ultimate champion of legalism. They were often viewed as barbarians by the more cultured states of the Central Plains, but this outsider status gave them an edge. They were not bound by old traditions or rituals. From the mid-4th century before Christ, under figures like Duke Xiao and his brilliant, ruthless minister Shang Yang, Qin underwent radical reforms. Shang Yang's reforms were breathtakingly effective and utterly brutal. He abolished the old feudal system, replacing it with a centralized bureaucracy where officials were appointed based on merit, not birth. He promoted agriculture and military service above all else, rewarding farmers and soldiers with land and titles. Laws were standardized and enforced with extreme severity. Everyone from peasant to noble was subject to the same strict code. His policies transformed Qin into a lean, efficient war machine, capable of mobilizing vast resources and manpower. Shang Yang himself, despite his success, met a gruesome end. After Duke Xiao's death, his enemies who resented his reforms had him torn apart by chariots, yet his legalist legacy persisted, a testament to its raw effectiveness. Qin's geographical location also gave it an advantage. Positioned in the fertile but defensible Guanzhong region, it had a natural fortress in the west, allowing it to consolidate power without constant threat from the more established eastern states. Once ready, Qin unleashed its might. The conquest was systematic and relentless. Starting in 230 before Christ, Qin launched a series of campaigns, one by one devouring its rivals. First, Han in 230 before Christ, then Zhao in 228 before Christ, still reeling from Changping. Wei fell in 225 before Christ. The massive state of Chu, a southern rival, took longer but was eventually crushed in 223 before Christ. Yan, in the distant north, succumbed in 222 before Christ. Finally, Qi, the last remaining Eastern power, surrendered without a major fight in 221 before Christ. The age of chaos was over. The Warring States period, a crucible of 5 centuries, had forged a single, unified China, and the man who stood at its apex was King Zheng of Qin. He declared himself not just king, but Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, a title suggesting he was the first of 1,000 generations of rulers. This was a new beginning, a radical break from the past. The story unfolds continued. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, was a man of immense vision and unparalleled ruthlessness. He understood that simply conquering the other states was not enough. He had to erase the old divisions, unify the disparate cultures, and impose a singular, absolute authority. His reforms were sweeping and designed for absolute centralization. The old feudal system, with its independent lords, was entirely abolished. The empire was divided into 36 commanderies and over 100 counties, all governed by officials directly appointed by the emperor, their loyalty ensured by strict legalist laws and fear. To facilitate administration and commerce across this vast new empire, Qin Shi Huang implemented a radical standardization program. Weights and measures were made uniform. The chaotic array of regional currencies was replaced with a single imperial coin. Even the axle widths of carts were standardized, so that every wagon could travel on the same roads, preventing ruts and ensuring smooth travel for his armies and administrators. Perhaps most importantly for long-term cultural unity, he standardized the written script. The myriad regional variations of Chinese characters were abolished, replaced by a single small seal script. This monumental act ensured that people across the vast empire, despite speaking different dialects, could read and understand official decrees and share a common literary heritage. It was a bedrock of Chinese identity that endures to this day. Qin Shi Huang was also a builder on an unprecedented scale. He ordered the construction of a vast network of imperial roads and canals, facilitating trade and the swift movement of troops. He also connected and expanded existing defensive walls in the north, laying the foundation for what would become the Great Wall of China, a monumental shield against nomadic raiders. But his rule was marked by extreme authoritarianism. He saw independent thought as a threat to his absolute power. In 213 before Christ, he famously ordered the burning of books and burying of scholars. Many philosophical and historical texts, especially those associated with Confucianism, were destroyed, and scholars who dared to oppose him were brutally executed. It was an attempt to control memory, to erase any narrative that challenged the Qin's authority. Qin Shi Huang also pursued immortality with fervent zeal. He commissioned the construction of an enormous mausoleum, guarded by the silent, magnificent terracotta army, thousands of life-sized clay soldiers, chariots, and horses, each unique, buried to protect him in the afterlife. It stands today as an awe-inspiring testament to his power and vision. Despite his monumental achievements, the Qin dynasty was notoriously harsh. The relentless conscription for wars and public works, the heavy taxation, and the draconian legalist laws fueled widespread resentment among the common people. Qin Shi Huang died in 210 before Christ, after just 11 years on the imperial throne. His death plunged the empire into a succession crisis. His weakest son, manipulated by ambitious eunuchs and ministers, ascended the throne. Within 4 years, widespread rebellions erupted across the empire, led by disgruntled peasants and former aristocrats. The Qin dynasty, the first unified empire, collapsed as quickly as it had risen in 206 before Christ. Impact and legacy. When the smoke cleared from the burning Qin palaces, nothing was the same. The Qin dynasty, though short-lived, had irrevocably changed China. Its immediate collapse seemed to confirm the Confucian critique that harsh, tyrannical rule would always fail. But paradoxically, the Qin had laid the unshakable foundation for every subsequent Chinese empire. The most profound legacy was the very concept of a unified, centralized China. The Qin had proven it was possible. The idea of Da Yitang, great unity, became an enduring political ideal. Even the Han Dynasty, which rose from the ashes of the Qin and championed Confucianism, largely retained the Qin's administrative structure. The commandery county system, the centralized bureaucracy, the standardized script, weights, and measures. These were the enduring blueprints for imperial governance for over 2 millennia. The standardization of the written script was a monumental achievement that fostered a shared cultural and linguistic identity across China. Despite diverse regional dialects, scholars and administrators could communicate, and a common literary heritage could develop. This single act contributed more to China's long-term cohesion than perhaps any other. The philosophies born from the crucible of the Warring States period also left an indelible mark. While legalism's harsh application led to the Qin's downfall, its pragmatic principles of statecraft and efficient administration continued to inform later dynasties, often subtly integrated into a broader, more palatable Confucian framework. Confucianism, once rejected by Qin Shi Huang, was revived by the Han and became the dominant state ideology, shaping Chinese ethics, education, and social structure for centuries. The Great Wall, first connected and expanded by Qin Shi Huang, became an iconic symbol of China's defense and imperial ambition. Roads and canals built during the Qin era continued to serve the empire for centuries, facilitating trade and communication. In a comparative perspective, the Qin's unification of China echoes the Roman Republic's transition to a vast empire. Both involved relentless military conquest, administrative centralization, and monumental infrastructure projects. However, Qin's authoritarian legalism and swift collapse contrast with Rome's more adaptable system and its centuries of imperial endurance. Yet both left behind a blueprint for unified governance that shaped their respective continents for millennia. The entire period, from Zhou fragmentation to Qin unification, underscored a recurring theme in Chinese history: the tension between centralization and regional autonomy. It taught dynasties that unity was paramount, but that it must be balanced with benevolent governance. The Qin had unified China, but it was the Han who learned from its excesses and found a way to make that unity endure. Reflections and lessons. The journey from the Zhou dynasty's honorable but flawed beginnings to the Qin's brutal but necessary unification offers profound lessons that echo through time. History, as the saying goes, does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. What makes a state truly powerful? The Warring States period shows us it is not just military might, but a comprehensive approach to governance, economics, and administration. Qin's rise wasn't accidental. It was the result of relentless reforms that empowered the state at the expense of the individual. What is the acceptable cost of unity and stability? Millions died during the Warring States period, and many more suffered under Qin's harsh rule. Was this suffering an inevitable price for forging a unified nation? What would you be willing to sacrifice for stability and order? We also learn about the enduring power of ideas. In times of chaos, philosophy thrives. The 100 schools of thought born from fragmentation provided answers that shaped a civilization. How do ideas, even those initially rejected, eventually rise to become cornerstones of society? Think of Confucianism, suppressed by Qin, yet becoming the guiding ideology for 2,000 years. Can ideas truly be destroyed by force? The mandate of heaven, a powerful concept introduced by the Zhou, teaches us about the accountability of power. It implied that rulers govern not by divine right alone, but by a moral contract with heaven and, by extension, with their people. When that contract is broken, legitimacy is lost. Is it the people's right or even duty to overthrow a tyrannical leader? What defines a truly just ruler? Consider the leaders of the spring and autumn and warring states periods. They were brilliant strategists, ruthless politicians, and often men of incredible ambition. Yet even the most powerful among them, like the hegemons, could not stop the tide of fragmentation until Qin Shi Huang. What does it take for one leader to succeed where generations of others have failed? Was it sheer force of will, superior strategy, or simply being at the right place at the right time with the right ideology? Finally, ponder the balance between freedom and security. Qin Shi Huang gave China unprecedented unity and security after centuries of war, but at the cost of individual liberties and intellectual freedom. Is there an ideal balance? How much control is too much? What kind of society would you choose to live in? One of fragmented freedom and constant war, or one of unified order and absolute control? Outro. In 5 centuries, China moved from a proud but decentralized feudal kingdom to a land torn apart by unending war, only to be forged anew into the most powerful, centralized empire the world had yet seen. The fall of the Western Zhou, the rise of the hegemons, the brutal warring states, and the ultimate triumph of Qin Shi Huang, each chapter a testament to human ambition, endurance, and the relentless march of history. This epic journey from chaos to unity fundamentally shaped the Chinese civilization we know today. But the story doesn't end with Qin Shi Huang. His harsh rule led to the dynasty's swift collapse, opening the door for the rise of the Han Dynasty, which would learn from Qin's excesses and build an even more enduring empire. How did the Han manage to create a lasting empire where the Qin failed? How did they synthesize legalist efficiency with Confucian benevolence? That is a story for another time. Perhaps you'd also be interested in the full story of the Terracotta Army or the life and wisdom of Confucius himself. Let us know in the comments below what you'd like to explore next. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through ancient China. These events happened centuries ago, but the questions they raise about power, unity, freedom, and the nature of humanity are eternal. As long as we study history, we continue to learn about ourselves. Until next time, keep exploring the past.